I'm an associate professor of educational leadership at the University of West Georgia.
And I am Lori Kimbrel. I'm an assistant professor at the University of West Georgia as well. And I am sharing my screen so we can go ahead and start our presentation today. Let's see, play from start. So our presentation is measuring program impact using a leadership behavior assessment. And again, we're from the University of West Georgia. So educational leadership faculty at the University of West Georgia have grappled with questions regarding the most effective manner in which to measure the impact of our programs. In our quest to understand our own effectiveness, we challenged ourselves with an initial set of inquiry questions. And the questions are listed here. Just briefly, we wanted to know how we could measure the impact of our Tier 1 Leadership Certificate program on student skill level. And Tier 1 is a series of 6 courses designed for entry-level school leaders and to allow them to earn their certificate in the state of Georgia. We also wanted to know whether we should focus on the measurement of behavior as opposed to values or dispositions, and what leadership behaviors are associated with each of the Georgia leadership standards and the professional standards for educational leaders, with PESLs. And we wanted to know how we can effectively and efficiently measure our student growth of leadership behaviors or qualities. So we're going to begin by talking about our discussion about how we would go about measuring the impact of our program. So our work really began by considering alignment. Our team collaboration over the last few years has focused on ensuring that we are teaching the skills and competencies that are necessary for effective school leaders and gathering data to understand if our efforts resulted in increased student skill level. Faculty spent a year reviewing the alignment of our courses to the Professional Standards for Educational Leaders, or PESL, and the closely related Georgia Educational Leadership Standards, or GELS. Consequently, the objectives for each of the 6 courses in our Tier 1 leadership program are aligned to between 1 or 2 of the GELS standards, and our program as a whole ensures that students are exposed to all of the standards by the time they're done. Each course has a key assessment that is aligned to the appropriate leadership standard. The alignment is an important start to measuring impact, but it does not allow us to triangulate our data. Search for another manner in which to measure our students' growth on the standards led us to a discussion of the creation or the implementation of an existing assessment that accurately measures educational leadership behaviors before and after our program.
Okay, so when we began to get into this work, we decided that we needed another data point to measure our students' progress toward mastery of those standards. And our conversation, it then turned to the measurement of behavior versus disposition. So, many of the measurement tools that are associated with our national standards were created specifically to design leadership dispositions, and yet there's not a lot of consensus about what dispositions that effective leaders actually have and how we can actually measure them very well. So the difficulty in measuring dispositions, it may stem from the definition of the term itself. Webster defines disposition as a prevailing tendency, a mood, an inclination, a temperamental makeup, or the tendency of something to act in a certain manner under given circumstances. So it's murky. It's a really murky term, and it implies that temperament or inherent personality traits are keys to effective leadership. If that's the case, it leaves those of us who do leadership development to wonder if those qualities, if they're static and they're immovable, a candidate either has them or doesn't. And if that's the case, then that directly contradicts the premise that we can coach and train leaders to be more effective over time. So from the literature about change, we've included specifically some things here from John Cotter and Dan Cohen and also Doug Reeves. Cotter and Cohen have been doing change leadership work, 40 years. And from their theoretical work and also their application in the field with literally thousands of organizations, they advocate a see, feel, change cycle. Now, their model starts with telling leaders, you've got to create this sense of urgency for change. You've got to do that. But most organizations, they're going to bring out the data and lots of charts and lots of analysis, and people's eyes glaze over and they don't ever capture that buy-in. So to capture that buy-in, they talk about using this very compelling story or visualization that captures people emotionally, and it helps to break down the resistance to change. And then once people's resistance is broken down, they buy in, they're willing to practice some of the behaviors, the new behaviors. When they do it, they get results. And then that in turn changes their values and their beliefs about these behaviors and these processes, and it eventually helps to change the culture. Doug Reeves does the same thing. He talks about the same thing, but he talks about it as behavior precedes belief in schools. Teachers actually have to practice behaviors. That would same thing for leaders. And once they practice these behaviors, whether they believe in them or not in the beginning, it will become a habit. They see results. Those results will then cause their values to shift and change. So in some behaviors, they can be taught, they can be learned, they can be practiced, and we can measure them. That's very different from that murky disposition that is so difficult.
So once we decided that we wanted to attempt to measure behavior as opposed to dispositions, we began a search for an instrument that would allow us to do just that. And we considered developing our own. We looked at existing instruments, and existing instruments are few and far between, and developing our own seemed like an onerous task. And so we began with a product that is called the Leadership Behavior Assessment. So we're going to describe the tool that we used. So the Leadership Behavior Assessment measures 16 essential leadership behaviors that are aligned to the professional standards for educational leaders. And this assessment includes 42 forced choice, multiple choice questions. Each question presents a brief but common leadership scenario and asks participants to respond by indicating the behavior they would choose in response. Each answer can earn up a maximum of 2 points and a minimum of -2 points, which makes the total range on the entire assessment between a high of 96 points and a low of -96 points. The assessment is administered online, and it typically takes our students about 30 minutes. I will also say this leadership behavior assessment is available from a company in California, developed by former school superintendents, and the company is Target Success. Upon completion of the assessment, an individual results analysis, the developmental profile, is automatically generated for each participant. The individual profile provides students' results in 4 broad leadership domains, as well as individual results aligned to the professional standards for educational leaders. Students are able to drill down and view their results on each of the related behavioral attributes that make up the leadership domains. And you'll see that in just a minute. The alignment of the leadership domains and the professional standards for educational leaders are provided. Again, we're going to show you that in just a second. But this profile that students get includes both raw scores, standard assessment scores that show students' scores on a 1 to 100 point scale, so that they can understand, again, on the very commonly used 100-point scale, how they did. So this is the alignment between the leadership domains of focus, affiliating, creating a culture of success and managing, and the professional standards for educational leaders, and then the related behavioral attributes. And so we took care when working with this to make sure that, again, that our classes were aligned to these PESEL standards. And so, again, each course measures a PESEL standard, and this alignment, again, became very important to us and important to our students as we were working to determine what these results of the assessment meant. So we used a pre and post test model for our students. And so beginning in the summer of 2019, students were asked to take the leadership behavior assessment early in their first semester in the program. Each semester, students were directed to access their developmental profile to consider their performance on the PESTEL standards aligned to the course in which they were enrolled. Students were required to fill out a worksheet that I'll show you in just a minute, in which they indicated their level of functioning on the leadership standard and the related behavioral attributes. Students then considered their results and set 2 improvement goals for the semester. Perhaps the most important step in the process was that the students named specific leadership behaviors aligned with their goals that they intended to deliberately practice that semester. At the end of the semester, each student submitted a goal reflection to their professor as a course requirement. Finally, during each student's last semester in the program, they took the leadership behavior assessment again as a post-test. So this is just a portion of the report that students received. And so you can see in this case, the attribute is open communication. It gives them their raw data and an interpretation of that data. And again, the important thing here is the scaled score. So again, in this case, a student had an 83 and they can think on a 100-point scale, I understand what an 83 means. It was a strength for them. There are questions for reflection, and also what you don't see here, the profile gives students related behaviors. So as they're setting goals for themselves, they don't have to come up with these behaviors themselves, although some do. Again, there are suggested related behaviors that they can use. So this is an example of a goal setting sheet. So in our school and community engagement course, it's connected to the Georgia Leadership and Professional Educational Leadership Standards, Communication and Community Relations Standard. So they fill in their score, whether it was a strength, functional, or a growth area. They consider all of the behavior attributes that make up this standard, and then they set 2 goals. Again, the most important piece here is behavior that they are committing to practice related to that goal, because the big idea is we are measuring behavior, not beliefs.
Okay, so let's show you here some of the results. Now, the students take this again. They take the assessment their first semester in the program very early in that first semester. They take it again at the end of their program. So what we have here, basically they finish their coursework in 3 semesters. Most students do, not all do, but most. So that's why we're naming them as cohorts, starting in for this one, summer 2019, finishing 3 semesters later in spring 2020. Now, what's important for you to understand is that these data, what we're doing here for this particular stage of this work, it's very preliminary data analysis. The numbers that you see here on this chart, they all come from raw scores. These are not scaled scores that Lori mentioned a minute ago, that on that scale of 100, 0 to 100, 1 to 100, but these are just the simple raw scores. Our only question right now at this point, our only question is there enough of something interesting here to make it worthwhile for us to engage in further analysis? So, taking a look at the increase column on the far right-hand side, you can see that there were increases in every single one of those domains. Now, you cannot compare the numbers in that column in the far right-hand side. It's not apples to apples yet, because this is not on these scaled scores, but they're all positive. All we care about right now is, did we see some kind of change taking place? This next slide is cohort 2. Again, if you look at the increases on the right-hand side, you're seeing changes take place. Again, do not say that, oh, bigger changes took place with culture at 3.83 than managing at 1.47, because we're working off of raw data right now. The next one, basically the same kinds of things I would say to you. But here's what our next steps are. We have got something going on. We don't know for sure if it's if it's coming just from these clinical practices where they practice these behaviors, is it the coursework, is it a mix of both? We suspect it's a mix of all of that. But what we want to do right now is yes, we've got these changes, these increases taking place. Our next steps are going to be, we're going to then analyze the data based on the scale scores, the ones that go from 1 to 100, and we're going to start linking it up to our the national standards, the PESEL standards.
Okay, so we have had some discussion, preliminary discussion based on these results that we have. One thing that's important to point out is that we had one of our research professors take a look at the assessment, and from the perspective of a psychometrician, this is not actually a valid and reliable measurement. However, from the perspective of our education leadership faculty, we can see in this raw data, it's measuring something. Even if it's a rough estimate of skill, the consistent increases that we've seen between the pre-test and post-test tell us that something is occurring. We do also have anecdotal evidence from our course evaluations and from student feedback that they really enjoy this online assessment. They love the immediate results that they get. They enjoy the goal setting process, just the practicality of setting behavior targets for themselves, behaviors that they will practice. It feels very, very doable and very concrete for them. We're in initial discussions about, as Myrna mentioned, determining to what do we attribute this growth that we see? Is it the course concepts? Is it clinical work? Is it goal setting? We hypothesize that it's probably a combination of all of those. And as we work further, we're going to try to parse that out a bit. Also, we recognize that as a faculty, we can improve the process of goal setting. We have quite a few adjunct professors because of the size of our programs. And so next year, early in the year, we really hope to solidify how we're having students use this data and write goals so that we're more consistent in this process. And as Myrna mentioned, we do have some important next steps. We need to continue that data analysis as she described. We need to reassess the alignment of our courses to the leadership standards. The Georgia Educational Leadership Standards have changed just a bit over the last few years, and they're more closely aligned with the PESELs now, so we'll take another look at that. I just discussed potential improvements in the goal setting process. And as we move along, we will publish and share our results with everyone. So thank you for listening and being part of this presentation. And this is our contact information. If you would like any further information about the work that we're doing or this assessment or how you might use it in your own program, you can contact either one of us and we'd be happy to share more with you.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Okay, so we're still recording, and let me now stop recording.